Yeah, and that's really been the whole crux of what we tried to do when we started this podcast was how can we learn at the intersection of brands and causes? And, what you just said is exactly what we tried to do. And that really, like, for those who know us, we started this podcast because we're both learners and we wanted to learn across sectors. We wanted to talk to unique people with different experiences and, see what themes could be applied and that our listeners could learn. And so that really is kind of the root of what this entire podcast was about.
What are the secrets that drive the businesses you love or nonprofits you admire? Join us as we uncover the surprising ideas at the intersection of causes and brands. I'm Dave Raley.
And I'm Berna. Each episode, learn from leaders of nonprofits and companies that will give you insights that you can put into action. This is the Purpose and Profit Podcast.
Season 6 of the Purpose and Profit Podcast is brought to you by Virtuous. Carly, welcome to the finale of the Purpose and Profit Podcast. At least
it sounds
for now.
Like a really sad memorial.
It does. It does. I'm trying. I feel nostalgic. I don't know about you, but I was thinking about these like television shows that we all watched growing up, or some of us watched growing up, and how like the finale, I feel like, Carly, was either the worst thing ever. Like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you just squandered.
Yes.
However many seasons of Seinfeld. Seinfeld like almost like kind of made me mad. And then there are like, some shows that had like good finales and like wrapped things up. So let's hope for the latter, right?
Yes, we'll have to bring the energy so it's not like for anyone who is in my age group, I guess, Gilmore Girls had an ending that was kind of like womp womp. So let's not do that.
Womp, yeah.
They had to follow it up with a Netflix series. So maybe we'll have to do that if this is not a good ending.
Oh, yeah, we can come back and do the like, remember when,
yes.
I love
like
it.
Fuller House, more purpose and profit.
Says my youngest daughter, by the way, who watches. Actually, she prefers Full House, to be clear. That's the world that we live in. But no, if you've been staying tuned to the feed, you saw our announcement that this would be our last episode for now. And the reality is that the Purpose and Profit, and we're going to talk about this today, the podcast has been such a gift to me personally, I think for you, Carly, and for us together, the connections we've made. But the reality is that the life right now has too many good things going on. And so I thought what we could do is just update a little bit of what we're up to, certainly what's led to today, why we're pressing pause on the podcast. And then you and I reflected on lessons from 6 seasons and finish well from there.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about what you're up to before we get into the 6 lessons?
Yeah, so let's do that. We teased a little bit actually earlier in the season with just everything that I've invested in the field of sustainable giving and what's been happening with recurring giving and my company Imago Consulting. Earlier this year, we released The Rise of Sustainable Giving. And Carly, I don't know what expectations I had. I'm reminded of the expectations you and I talked about early in the show. I'm very goal-oriented, but I don't set big, expectations. But whatever those were, Carly, the book and the work that we've been doing with charities on recurring giving has far exceeded anything I could have imagined. I think we estimated in the first 10 weeks of the book being out earlier this year, we were in front of 10,000 nonprofit leaders. And I don't take that for granted. By the way, that's incredible. I'm honored. But it's also just a drop in the bucket. I mean, my vision is for the 1.1 million charities in the U.S. today that have not yet taken opportunity to grow recurring giving. And so that has been a massive rocket ship that we've been writing this year and just came off as we record this, just finished our first sustainable giving workshop, 20 organizations learning on how to grow recurring giving. And there's just been, as you and I talked about it offline, just so much stuff, all good, but just too much good stuff. And so as we got to talking about the show, we had just wrapped season 6 and had several pretty awesome guests for season 7, including Eric Olson, who you've heard by now in the feed. And so it just it kind of it did make me sad to think, oh man, we had one of the lead engineers from Google lined up, and so never say never. We might get a chance to come back to that.
Yeah, I feel like this has been a good jumping point too. And earlier this year, I don't think we talked about it a ton on the podcast, but we got to do, how many events did we do?
Oh my gosh, we did 6 events
We love
across
6
the country.
in this
6
season,
is our
in this
6
episode. Yeah,
I never noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah, we did 6 events at different conferences where we launched Dave's book, and we partnered with sponsors, other great companies that sponsor this podcast that we often talk about. But that was awesome to just kind of see the community of both Purpose and Profit podcast and sustainable giving kind of coming together.
And to see the show taking off. I mean, we were looking at the numbers, and I think you had said that it was over 100% growth season to season.
Yeah.
This season. And so we definitely feel like, I don't want to say going out on top, but some Michael Jordan retirement joke insert here.
Yeah.
Although we're not going to play baseball. Thankfully, we're going to do things that we're already good at. So we got that going for us.
Yeah.
See, aren't you proud of me, Carly? I made a sports reference.
I am. If you've been a long time listener, I'm more of the sports reference. Dave is more of the Disney references.
Yes. In our finale, yes, it's like part of the finale is to go back to all the insider jokes, and that was Dave is very quiet whenever the guest starts speaking in sports language.
Yes. Yeah, and actually, Dave, when we started this podcast, I was working for a nonprofit and doing fundraising. And if you don't know how we started, go back and listen to like episode 0 if you're interested. And now I work for Virtuous, leading the marketing team there, which is a nonprofit CRM, which has sponsored the podcast actually from the very beginning. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, that's been super cool, and we've both had a lot of life change over the last 4 years. That's for sure. Okay, so what we did was we looked back at the last 6 seasons, 64 episodes, just some incredible conversations, and we pulled out 6 lessons that we want to go over. Trade kind of back and forth on just the things that stood out to us, that if this was our last episode for now, what would we want people to take away? What are some of those key insights? So Carly, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I think, and I would say these themes really go over multiple episodes. So if you've been a listener, you'll be like, oh yeah, I totally remember them talking about this. But the first one was just this idea of cultivating a strong leadership and a learning culture. We did some episodes, Dave, that were just based on something that you had written. And I know this was something you talked about, was 7 Habits of Nonprofit Leaders. And we also talked to Ted Vaughn, probably like in our first or second season, about this idea of culture. But I can't tell you how many times in my career, or even just looking at other nonprofits, where like a strong leadership is what makes that organization succeed or not. And this ability to keep learning and not be stagnant. I feel like, the whole purpose of this podcast is to learn from both sides of nonprofits and for-profits. But that's something that really surpasses, or that really goes to both sides. Yeah.
Well, and for me, I don't think we've ever used the phrase growth mindset. People will be familiar with that. But, just the DNA of the show from the beginning, from your DNA, from my DNA, of like, hey, the nonprofit sector, needs great content, and when you and I got to talking about it, it was like, no, we're both super curious people. We want to learn, and so in some ways, it's not surprising to me, right, that our guests would also be learners. But I totally agree that strong leadership being coupled with a learning culture is just so critical.
Yep. What's the second lesson?
Yeah, so the one that's stood out
really?
to
You're
me...
going to talk about recurring giving?
Yeah, to no one's surprise, is in longevity, when we think about that, like focus on long-term recurring models. And so, yes, spoiler alert, I just wrote a book on the subscription economy. But it was so interesting thinking back on some of the interviews, Carly, because when we started this podcast, I did not have intention to write a book, period, let alone a book on what was happening with the subscription economy. Now, a good chunk of the show, 3 of the 4 years I have been, doing that research. So to have people like Robbie Kelman-Baxter, who is, really a pioneer in the subscription space. Her first client was this, small startup called Netflix, right? And what we learned about not only subscriptions there, but just predictable revenue models and how that has totally, of course, intersected the world of purpose, not just from a business lesson perspective, but from a sustainability perspective.
Yeah, we even talked to Charity Water in our first season about their recurring giving model, which is by far the one that every nonprofit looks to. So again, something that is on both sides of for-profit and nonprofit.
Yeah. What's the next one?
The next one is to see and correct assumptions and be willing to pivot. And I think one of my favorite episodes is when we talked about Blockbuster's early days when they were, just blowing up movies. But then that they really didn't pivot and they got totally taken over by eventually Netflix, but probably in the beginning, even like Redbox, if you remember those. I feel like we talked to a ton of people guests on the episodes that had to either pivot or they had failed examples of pivoting. But I feel like often we can learn the most from those failure stories. But that idea of, hey, yeah, you can have an assumption, you can have a hypothesis, but if it's not working, you have to be able to shift. Yeah. And we actually did this entire podcast through COVID. And there was a lot of conversations we had during that time too about like, hey, everything's changing. Like you have to shift, you have to innovate, you have to be able to see things that aren't working and adjust. And so that was one of the lessons.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, that's a perfect segue into the fourth lesson, which was that was to keep your mission constant, but let your model evolve. In fact, the last episode of season 6 was don't confuse your mission with your model. And you mentioned Blockbuster Tom Beck. That was our guest that episode. Sheba Phillip, all the way back to our very first episode of season 1.
Also Disney.
We'll come around to Disney. But just these, and Sheba was with, among other things, with JCPenney. And that was a model that also had difficulty pivoting. I remember our conversation with Tammy Heim. You and I both know Tammy personally. And she was president of Borders Bookstores when this little upstart Amazon was starting to take over the world. And so just a constant theme of saying like, hey, your mission is unchanging, but your model had better adapt to your environment. And time again, we see that happening. And so what does it look like to differentiate the mission of your organization and your model and live out your mission while understanding that your model might need to change?
Yeah, and I think that's a critical point now. We did a handful of episodes on AI that didn't make it into our top 6, thank goodness. But as that's changing all of the industries, like you might have to change your model to adjust to that, but keep your mission the same. So I think we'll continue to see examples of that as we go.
Yeah. All right, what's the next one?
The next one is build an entrepreneurial culture. And if you actually go to our website and read our original bios that we wrote 5 years ago, I wrote in there, I'm pretty sure it's in there, but I often say that I have worked as an entrepreneur in different companies. When I worked at a nonprofit, I worked for a leader who was very entrepreneurial. And so I got to be more of an entrepreneur within the confines of that organization, but had the ability to test and try things and, be okay if it didn't work out. And so we talked to a lot of different people over the years about that. We mentioned Sheba Phillips, she was one, but also Chick-fil-A. They have an entire innovation department, which if you're curious how like they innovate on chicken or the process of creating chicken, that's a great episode to check out. But that's something that I am super passionate about, is this idea of feeling like, even if it's not entrepreneurial, but intrapreneurial, like you own the business, like you own being creative, finding solutions, solving problems, trying new things. And that's really what enables growth. But again, it goes back to that creating a culture of strong leadership and learning so that you have the ability to have that entrepreneurial culture. And I think even large organizations like Chick-fil-A can keep that entrepreneurial culture if they're really intentional in doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I loved the Chick-fil-A example. We ended up having two folks from Chick-fil-A, Jeff Henderson, who's the one of their leadership guides, and David Farmer, the head of innovation. And I still remember getting a chance actually a couple of years ago to go tour their innovation facility in Atlanta and just see how that what lessons we can learn from that to apply to leading businesses, but also leading charities. I also loved our conversation with on that front with entrepreneurial cultures with Donna Lucas, who is now with a charity called Johnny and Friends. But prior to that, she was with a major clothing brand, which included Dickies. And her story, I still remember, of like these, coveralls that were like selling out of sizes, and her boss sent her to like shut down the retailer or whatever. And it turned out the retailer had like innovated and created these like kid friendly coveralls out of these like small size workman outfits, and how that is now a multi-billion-dollar part of the organization's brand. But it took Donna, in this case as an entrepreneur, to identify those opportunities and to really make the case. I loved how she described her meeting with her senior executive, with the founder of the company, and how she approached that, how the founder responded, and ultimately, as they say, the rest is history. So it was pretty cool just getting to be, on the front line, so to speak, of hearing these people's stories.
Yeah, and that's really been the whole crux of what we tried to do when we started this podcast, was how can we learn at the intersection of brands and causes? And, what you just said is exactly what we tried to do. And that really, like, for those who know us, we started this podcast because we're both learners, and we wanted to learn across sectors. We wanted to talk to unique people with different experiences and, see what themes could be applied and that our listeners could learn. And so that really is kind of the root of what this entire podcast was about.
Yeah. So to round out our lesson, so just to repeat for our listeners, right? So the first thing we talked about is cultivating a strong leadership and learning culture. The second is to focus on long-term recurring support, recurring revenue, the subscription economy. The third is to really see and correct assumptions, be willing to pivot. The fourth being to keep your mission constant, but let your model evolve. And the fifth is build an entrepreneurial culture. And so just to kind of wrap it all around, the sixth lesson that as you and I talked about this, and just all the conversations we've had and the lessons that we've learned is simply this, and that is to learn from each other across sectors. Carly, I was, as I usually am, just at an event in DC. When I was at an event in Chicago after that, and because I get to go around and be a part of these different events in these different communities, I get to see the value of cross-pollination, of getting into environments with people that you wouldn't normally spend time with. And so, if you're a leader listening to this today and you're whether you're in the nonprofit sector or the for-profit sector, I would highly recommend, number one, you need to get out. You need to go to these different events. Some of them might be more conferences, association-style events. Some are, individual workshops or trainings or roundtables. But I would highly recommend thinking about two categories. And Carly, you and I have talked about this, but one category of event you should absolutely go to are your peers, right? Yes, go to the place where all the birds, how do they say it? The birds of a feather flock together, right? Go to that event, connect with those peers. There could be partnership opportunities. You could learn from what others are doing. But secondarily, go to an event where you're going to be challenged, where you're going to see people from different sectors And just because the opportunity for learning, the term in innovation is weak ties. These are people that are not as connected to you as you are. And there's just such incredible opportunity for learning by going to events and spending time with people that are not in your typical world. There's a couple other lessons I want to hit on from this, but just thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've had a really amazing opportunity to do that recently, just in, kind of shifting from what you were doing to what you're doing now and just getting to meet different people. But that was, these are people that I wouldn't run into, our guests, like some executive at Chick-fil-A and some executive that was at Blockbuster or whatever, like learning from them and getting out of that, sometimes that echo chamber that we're in, especially if we work in nonprofit or if you work in a specific for-profit industry where you only hang out with people in that industry, like getting to hear from other people is super beneficial.
Yeah. And I think about just the reach that we've been able to have from, whether it's, professional sports. We've had multiple guests, from the NBA and the NFL. Thank you, by the way, Carly, for carrying those episodes. To our guests from Disney. I was only allowed to have one Disney-oriented episode per season. Can you believe it, everybody? But multiple former Imagineers and people at ABC and television, to some pretty incredible nonprofits, not just Charity Water, Compassion International, from just quite the spectrum, International Justice Mission. And it's just been so cool, Carly. I mean, as I think about, what we've been able to benefit from being on the front lines of this, I'm just so blessed.
Yeah, it's been really amazing.
For over 40 years, Dickerson Baker has been a trusted partner to nonprofits across the country and the globe. They've worked with thousands of organizations and helped raise billions of dollars to support meaningful missions. Their expertise spans fundraising, leadership development, and strategic growth. Dickerson Baker, advancing nonprofits. Boost your nonprofit's donor engagement with Synergy's phone-based solutions. From P2P texting to voice broadcasting or inbound call handling to mid-level solutions, they are your donor engagement team. Visit synergydms.com.
So we do have a lightning round to round out this episode, but it's not going to be our normal question. So for our number one fans, shout out to my sister who listens to every lightning round and asked me why we changed the questions when we did. It's going to be a different lightning round. So I have 3 questions we're both going to answer. Hopefully a little more lighthearted than our 6 lessons learned, but hopefully you learned something from those. All right. Are you ready, Dave?
Oh, I am ready.
Okay.
Let's do this.
Favorite episode or memory from the podcast?
I'm going to say it's hard to pick one. I think honestly, so I'm going to kind of do 2.
Sure.
So the first one was our first episode ever with Sheba Phillip. She not only is a very articulate and smart human being, and in fact, one of our national events this year in Dallas, she got to come because she's based in Dallas. So that was cool, getting to actually spend time with our guests in person. But just her generosity and investment, and like that episode was, so it was literally our first, and it was like, okay, I think this format works. Like, I think we're onto something. But Carly, can I have one more?
Yes, you can.
And that is basically every episode you and I did together, because we heard this from people, but I know that just the chance for you and I to riff on some of these topics and, has just been really fun. And so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. My favorite episode, plural, is every Disney fanatical episode we had, where, especially when we had like an Imagineer, like Dave was like a 5-year-old child, basically, like so excited to talk about Disney.
Somebody's got to bring the enthusiasm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're definitely very enthusiastic, Dave. So all of those were fun, and just kind of like, the jokes that came out of some of those little personal.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. If your meme was anything sports related, my meme was definitely everything Disney related.
Yes.
I'll take it. I'll own it.
Yeah. All right. Second question is funniest moment. And I'm going to go first. I'm going to say 2. I'm going to allow myself 2. The first, I don't know if you remember this, but like when we first recorded the podcast and we were like recording the opening, like whatever, you had never done a podcast and I had, not like I was like a podcast expert, but I had done some podcasting and we like played it back. Do you remember this? And it was like Dave's very monotone, like, hello, this is Dave. We're here at the Purpose and Profit podcast. So,
and in my head, by the way, that was huge.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
Whoa, that was the most.
Yeah. So just Dave's journey. Go back and listen to some early episodes and then hear like his articulation, enunciation is like passion growing. So that's one. The second is, and I've told Dave this before, but Dave has become like a meme in my family. Like if you listen to the opening credits of our podcast, it's like, hi, I'm Dave. And my cousins think that's the funniest thing, and they say it all the time. They're like, hi, I'm Dave. And they even ask, like, where's Dave? What's he doing? Like, Dave has become like a caricature in my family.
Oh, I'm so glad to be a caricature in this
I'm
world.
Sure.
No, and I remember, and you remember very well. I was a little, I think nervous might be a fair term, but just like, oh my gosh, like I've never done this before. I'm in my head, and when you have monitors on and you can literally hear every word you're saying, it's a head trip. And so I highly recommend it, by the way. You do eventually get comfortable. And that's honestly, I think, Carly, one of the reasons why I've appreciated our episodes so much is because there is a lot more ability to just riff and do that. So I appreciate being the meme and going on the journey of moving from monotony.
What's your funniest moment?
I was telling you this before we started recording. Like, for me, I feel like every episode has had like humor to it, right? I mean, every episode has had laughable moments. And so I can't pick out one particular episode or one particular guest. But it's just been like the word comes to mind, joy. It's like we're here to learn lessons, and there's very much a learner posture here, and we're going to talk about, these different sectors and what we can learn from each other. But I think I'd like to think we've been able to do that in a way that does just bring joy, and it leans into that. I think that's one of the reasons, by the way, the Disney jokes or the sports jokes or the whatever really work, because it's us just being passionate, and part of being passionate is being a little silly sometimes. Yeah.
Some of our, also, we should post some of these, but we have like some pretty funny like screenshots. Remember when we would do like screenshots that we would never post?
Our selfies.
Yes. All right. Last and final lightning round question. What was your biggest learning from all 6 seasons?
Ooh, that's a big one.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Mine was honestly, like I said, we kind of went into this kind of naive, like this would be fun. Like we love learning from people. But just kind of what you talked about before, like what you can learn from just being curious. Like we really didn't have any other agenda besides curiosity. We weren't like trying to sell something. There wasn't like some other agenda. It was just like, tell us your story. Like everyone has a story. Tell us something about you. And it just like that learning and that just kind of curiosity was my biggest learning of like, hey, if you have no agenda, ask questions, like really be about learning. And I think that's pretty rare these days. Often when we're asking questions, it's for a reason, like, oh, can I use your knowledge to do this? Can I use your experience to do this? Not just, hey, we really want to learn from you. Like, that's what we want to do.
I love that. I think for me, if I kind of look back at the broader arc of the last 6 seasons, it's this, there's this loop, and I talk about it in some of the stuff that I've written on and I call it the imago loop, because imago, by the way, Latin, is basically a reference to the word image or imagination. But really, and Carly, the reason I chose it for the name of my company is because it's a word picture of a future that will be, but does not yet exist. And so there's this idea of like, you have to be able to see things that you wouldn't see otherwise. And so when I think back to the last 6 seasons, I think of this loop that I think every leader, every person who aspires to grow really needs to go through. And it's this loop of, it's 4 words, so sorry, but see, perceive, understand, and then do. And I think hopefully this podcast has helped people to see things that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. Like if you don't keep your eyes open, it's like the person walking down the sidewalk with their, nose buried in their phone. If you don't see, then you're obviously going to miss stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But then the next step is to perceive. Like, do you actually perceive what might matter to you, or how this might disrupt your environment, or what you might do? And we heard so many stories about moving from seeing to perception. But then I think perception is not understanding. Perception is, man, it seems like this AI stuff is everywhere. That does not mean understanding, right? And so I think leaders then move to this step of understanding, and they, go deeper, and they say, okay, well, I think this is going to matter to me or to my organization or to what we're trying to do. But then they actually go deeper, and there's an old story of Jeff Bezos, when he was back before he was like the cool hipster yacht guy, when he was the geek, actually building Amazon. His thing was like, he was a Wall Street finance guy, banker, and he was making a boatload of money, and he had just had a kid, bought a house, and he saw this thing like called the internet, and e-commerce. And he was like, this thing is growing faster than anything I've ever seen before, but I don't understand it. And so he dedicated himself to like learning, right? And I feel like that's the ethos of this show, is to move from not just seeing or perceiving, but to then understanding. And then the final step, which we don't spend a lot of time on the show doing, but I hope our listeners do, and that is doing, like take action, do something about it. Certainly as somebody who spends a lot of time in wonder and thinking about things, that's one that I always have to keep in mind, is like, okay, now's the time for action. Let's go. And I hope, Carly, as our listeners even reflect on the last however many episodes you've listened to. I'm not assuming everyone. If you have, by the way, listened to every episode, we have some swag we would like to send to you.
Yeah. Please
email. Actually, either of us. But or put a note on the show. We'll make sure we see it. But I hope that that's something people come away with, is like, yeah, that show did help me see things. It helped me perceive things. It helped me understand things, and I did something about it.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to wrap it up. I have one bonus lightning round question,
Ooh,
Dave.
Let's do it.
See if you can think of an answer. I have one, so I'll start. But we kind of talked about like funniest moments with each other, but funniest moment with a guest. And my answer is Tammy Heim. Do you remember in her original episode, or she's only done one, but her first episode, this was during COVID, and we asked her what, like, she was binge watching. And do you remember she said Turkish dramas? She was binge watching. Now that you say
that, I remember that.
Turkish, like, and they were like in Turkish, I think. But it was like just so far-fetched. And I feel like there was a lot of those where like a guest would be like, oh, I wanted to be an astronaut, or, whatever it was.
Yeah, and you had no idea.
You're like, wow. So I feel like that was the funniest for me, or the most surprising maybe.
Yeah, I think on the surprising front, there were some guests that really like had huge juxtapositions in who they are. Like I remember Richard Newcomb, who was at Union Rescue Mission now, but he had come from like fashion brands. And he's telling us stories of like weekly flying to New York City and just like doing deals and making things happen. And now he's working with a rescue mission, helping homeless people. You're like, how does that happen?
Or like Ken Caldwell, who at the time we interviewed him was working for Compassion, but previously had founded Stuffed Crust Pizza.
Mr. Inventor of Stuffed Crust Pizza, which we've had multiple guests actually say, yeah, you had that guy on.
Yeah, the Stuffed Crust Pizza guy.
So thank you, Ken. Thanks for joining the show. No, it's been so good, Carly, and I'm just so appreciative of you and just thinking about the journey this last number of years. Thankfully, we're both in this industry, and we're going to continue to hang out and get to do stuff together off air.
Actually, we should post a selfie because next week, you guys aren't going to believe this. This episode will land after that, but Dave and I are going to Disney together.
We are going to. It took us 4 years
Yeah.
and putting the show on ice to get to go to Disney together, but it's going to happen.
We'll have to take a purpose and profit
with
selfie.
one of our former guests, no less, by the way,
Yes.
Mel McGowan. So it's going to be super fun. And you and I have done multiple episodes on the importance of connection in person, and so we're going to be living it out. And so, thank you if you've been listening to the show. We're so grateful to you, and we hope this has been helpful. I mean, if you really have been touched by the show, we would love to hear it. I'm realizing that LinkedIn is probably actually the easiest way to get both of us. So message us on LinkedIn. We would love to hear some of your favorite moments. If you literally listen to every episode of all 6 seasons, please let us know, because I seriously am going to send you something. And I think that's probably a good place to wrap, Carly.
Yeah. Again, pause. Maybe we'll continue someday. Just flood Dave's email if you want that.
Yeah. That's I was going to try to think of a good finale metaphor for that, but I think that's good for now.
Yeah.
Until later, until next time, until the future. All right. Yep. It's been good, Carly.
It has.
We want to thank all of our sponsors for supporting Season 6 of the Purpose and Profit podcast, including Virtuous, Faith Search Partners, Dickerson Baker, Share, Synergy, Avid, and Imago Consulting. For more episodes of Purpose and Profit, visit www.purposeandprofitpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and we'd love it if you would rate the show and write us a review. Your feedback is valuable to us. Follow the show on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. You can also sign up for our email newsletter to get the latest updates. Thanks for listening.